Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Battle Cry with me, Shiv Aroor. It's nearly 2 months of the Russia-Ukraine war, and in the last 8 weeks, Ukraine has managed to mount hit after hit on a superior invading force. Let's make no mistake, Ukraine is devastated, its cities are in ruins, but it has managed to quake Russia in this spirited defense of one of the worst conflicts it has ever seen. 2 months of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Destruction and damage defines this war. But the invading forces have been shaken. From endless graveyards of Russian tanks to non-stop shoot-downs of Russian fighters, to the sinking of Russia's Black Sea flagship. Ukraine's fight back stuns the world. Russia quaked by Ukraine's tireless defense. Join us as we look back on Ukraine's biggest hits on Putin's war machine. Right through the conflict and invasion so far, Ukraine's air power has been practically non-existent. Its air force is dwindling, it's been on the ground, but now things might actually start to turn a little bit because the country has begun to receive its first aviation consignments that will make its existing fleet of MiG-29 fighters more available and more flight-worthy. And that doesn't mean that Ukraine hasn't given Putin's attacking pilots reason for pause. Take a look. For 2 months now, Ukraine has received hell from the air. An uninterrupted campaign of Russian airstrikes pounding many towns and cities into oblivion. Ukraine has managed to shoot down its fair share of Russian jets, but has persistently pleaded with the West to supply it with desperately needed fighter aircraft. And now, 8 weeks into the war, its prayers have at least partially been answered. The Pentagon on Wednesday revealed a recent transfer of aviation equipment to Ukraine.
I would just say, without getting into what other nations are providing, that they have received additional platforms and parts to be able to increase their fleet size, their aircraft fleet size. I think I'd leave it at that.
It's not hard to guess what the Pentagon spokesperson was referring to. Recently, the governments of Bulgaria, Poland and Slovakia had expressed willingness to transfer their MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine. But these haven't really fructified so far. But according to reports on the ground, dismantled MiG-29s have likely arrived by the land route from neighboring Slovakia now. Importantly, as clarified by the Ukrainian Air Force, these aren't flight-worthy aircraft, but rather supplied in order to make available spares and components to Ukraine's existing MiG-29 fleet.
There are no new aircraft, but these are spare parts which will give a boost to their fleet, existing fleet of fighting jets. And considering the way things have been going, any help for Ukraine at this point of time is going to be of a great significance because it's very clear that this war isn't ending. The end is nowhere to be seen.
This would make Ukraine's dwindling fighters more available and more flight-worthy. The actual move may not be the game changer that Ukraine is hoping for, but any boost to its crippled air power will be very welcome to the defending nation. Meanwhile, Russia, which has warned against NATO's direct involvement in the conflict, hasn't officially reacted to the move, but could use the development to escalate further or ramp up its own air attacks in eastern Ukraine.
A little too late in the day for Ukraine, because Ukraine has been asking for it for a very long time, and it's only coming now. But the other line of thought over here in Moscow is also that Russia is not just looking at NATO entering Ukraine. Russia is also looking at how NATO is enhancing capabilities of the Ukrainian forces. If the capabilities come to stand at a point where there will be massive damage to the Russian forces, then in all probability Russia is going to use all its force and might.
As the Russia-Ukraine conflict gets set to begin its third month, could much of the new fighting happen in the skies over Ukraine? The countdown has begun. With Abhishek Bhalla in Sumy, Ukraine, and Geeta Mohan in Moscow, Bureau Report, India Today. And one of the newest weapons headed Ukraine's way is a mysterious new attack drone. We only know the name of it. It's called Phoenix Ghost, and it's part of a new consignment of weapons that the United States has cleared for Ukraine. It is said to be a custom-built, tailor-made suicide drone for the Ukrainian armed forces. Here's everything we know about this new weapon that will soon be in Ukraine's hands. In 2 months of war, one of Ukraine's key weapons against the invading forces has been its fleet of combat drones. In video after video, Ukraine has demonstrated drone application to lethal effect. From destroying Russian tanks and vehicles, to even allegedly distracting Russia's giant cruiser Moskva so it could be targeted from another direction with anti-ship missiles. And now, Ukraine is all set to receive a mysterious new combat drone. The United States has just announced the supply of a newly developed attack drone specifically customized and fine-tuned for the Ukrainian military. The mystery drone, designated Phoenix Ghost, has been developed by the California-based AVEX Aerospace with direct inputs from the Ukrainian military. While no images exist of the Phoenix Ghost, it is said to be a derivative of the Switchblade drone system that's already being supplied to Kyiv. The precise details of the drone remain unclear, but it will be a huge addition to Ukraine's aerial defenses against Russian assaults.
This is a drone that had been in development before the invasion, clearly. The Air Force was working this. This unmanned aerial system is designed for tactical operations. In other words, largely but not exclusively to attack targets.
Designed to attack, the mysterious Phoenix Ghost will have similar capabilities with the AeroVironment Switchblade. The Phoenix Ghost drone will be able to hover over an area for up to 30 to 40 minutes hunting for targets. Drone operators on the ground will be able to hit targets with a small warhead at a range of up to 10 kilometers. This mysterious new drone can take off vertically, fly for over 6 hours searching for and tracking targets, and operate at night using infrared sensors. The new weapon, headed to Ukraine's arsenal, would be able to take on Russian medium-armored ground targets. The deadly Phoenix Ghost drones can also be reused for surveillance missions if they're not employed as kinetic weapons against Russian forces. The US has already fast-tracked production efforts to arm Ukraine with the Phoenix Ghost.
This particular system would very nicely suit their needs, particularly in eastern Ukraine.
These drones are part of a larger $800 million security assistance package announced by the White House. The package also includes 72 155mm howitzers, over 1.4 lakh artillery rounds, field equipment, armored vehicles, other tactical drones, anti-tank guided missiles, counter battery and air defense radars, helicopters, and a whole lot more. As the conflict rages on, the US military is tailoring capabilities in each defense assistance package to what the Ukrainian forces need in the field. The next phase will feature the mysterious Phoenix Ghost. Bureau Report, India Today. By far the biggest hit on the Russian forces so far by Ukraine has been the claimed sinking of the Moskva cruiser. It's the flagship of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea and is something that has broken millions of Russian hearts. Even as the world comes to terms with one of the biggest ever modern Navy losses, Ukraine believes this is the true strength of their defense. An unthinkable image for every Russian. A sight that will sink millions of Russian hearts. Just days after Russia's Black Sea Fleet flagship sank, the first image has emerged of the stricken vessel of war. Once an icon of Russian pride, seen in these final moments last week, listing dangerously to one side after either being hit by Ukrainian missiles or a devastating explosion on board. Let's try and decode this first dramatic image of the stricken 13,000-ton guided missile Russian cruiser. The most obvious is the smoke billowing out of the superstructure, clear signs of fires still blazing below deck. Also notice how the ship is listing dangerously to one side, confirming structural damage from the explosions. If the Moskva was indeed hit by a pair of Ukrainian Neptune missiles, then they appear to have smashed into the ship in this frontal area, just behind where the ship's own P-1000 Vulcan anti-ship missile launchers are located. Notice these gaping holes in the hull of the ship? Some of the strongest evidence that a missile strike is likely what doomed the Moskva. These appear to be impact points for the incoming Ukrainian sea-skimming missiles. There is also clear smoke damage in the rear end or the aft of the ship, suggesting that this photograph was taken after a much larger fire consumed the vessel. The picture of the doomed Moskva has clearly been taken from another Russian vessel, one of many that converged for rescue operations.
While this new image of the damaged Moskva answers many questions about where the ship was hit and where was the damage caused, several questions still remain unanswered.
While this new image of the damaged Moskva answers many questions about where the ship was hit and the kind of damage that was caused, several unanswered questions remain, questions that will hopefully be answered in the days ahead. For instance, how did just 2 anti-ship missiles sink this huge ship? Why is there total silence on the condition of the 510 crew who were reportedly evacuated? Did the Ukrainian missiles cause a fire detonating ammunition on board? If the fire was accidental as Russia claims, why is Russia talking of retaliation? And finally, why are families of the crew on board so conspicuously unheard and unseen? With the Moskva, Russia has lost more than just any military platform. It has lost a piece of its legacy and military heritage. With Mosmi Singh in Dnipro, Ukraine, Bureau Report, India Today. Everywhere our reporters have traveled in Ukraine, they've seen graveyard after graveyard of Russian tanks and armored vehicles, the result of a resilient attack on these supply lines, which has seriously paused the ground invasion by Russia. Here's a look at how Ukraine has rained hell from the air and with anti-tank missiles, giving Russia's ground invasion the most serious lessons in a very long time. Perhaps the most sustained, defining image from the Ukrainian combat zone has been endless convoys of destroyed Russian tanks, mangled metal corpses, their turrets blown off, their guns pointing aimlessly and uselessly to the side, bombed to oblivion by Ukrainian drones and anti-tank missiles. The armor of Putin's invading ground forces, a terrifying testament to Ukraine's dogged defense. India Today's reporters have been up close with these veritable tank graveyards.
Now this is a burnt Russian tank, remains of a burnt Russian tank. The V sign, as you see on the barrel in front, is a clear indication, as Russian tanks use two signs. They either use a V or a Z or a Z. The tank completely shattered and destroyed. It's the gun and the turret, they just lie some distance away, buried in sand, an indication of the kind of impact that took place. And this tank is completely charred, burnt. What Ukrainian army personnel tell us that this was targeted using a Javelin anti-tank guided missile.
The Russian armored columns and mechanized forces had hoped to mount a brutally enforced siege of Ukraine's cities. It was through the barrel of these machines that Putin had hoped to quickly impose his will. The tanks and their backup forces have done untold damage in Ukraine, it's true. That is without doubt. But the tank commanders themselves had not accounted for just how well equipped the Ukrainians would be. Armed with NATO-supplied Javelin shoulder-fired missiles, Russian tanks have lived through a nightmare in Ukraine so far. What Russia had hoped would be an unchallenged rumble through the highways of Ukraine has resulted in massive combat losses to Russia's armored forces. According to the latest Ukrainian claims, well over 800 Russian tanks have been destroyed so far and counting.
This is a destroyed tank, and this is again has been destroyed by a top attack. If you see, the tracks are intact, the tracks of the tank are intact. There is no impact from the side, but the top has been destroyed, and that is a turret. Turret has gone and fallen there of this tank. So this has been probably attacked by a Javelin missile, or by a TB2 missile, or by a drone, which generally attacks from top, which is the softest part of the tank.
2 months into the war, as Russia concentrates its forces in the eastern parts of Ukraine, the condition of Russian armor is very different there. In the east, Russian tanks have established total control, but remain vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks here as well.
I'm atop a T-64 Russian tank, and they are now preparing to roll in to the border areas, the front line. The preparation is on. The weapons are being placed, ammunition being placed inside the tank. They were taking a break, but now they're preparing themselves to go to where we're coming from, the last village that now is under Russian control.
Russia's tank fleet is obviously much larger than the forces deployed in Ukraine. So theoretically, there's more where this came from. But with armored losses notching up to the claimed 1,000 mark and counting, Ukraine could perhaps say that Putin's invasion has tanked. But the war is far from over, and there's much more damage expected ahead. Would you believe it if we told you that 8 squadrons worth of Russian fighter aircraft have been shot down in the war so far by Ukrainian forces? Well, that's what Ukraine claims. There's no way to corroborate those figures. But if the actual damage to Russian fighter jets is anywhere close to that figure, it's a huge achievement. And remember, the Ukrainian Air Force is pretty much non-functional. They've been depending only on ground-based air defense weaponry. Take a look at how Putin's pilots have truly lived a nightmare in Ukraine. Another defining image of the Ukraine war has been Ukraine's spirited defense of its airspace. With NATO refusing to impose a no-fly zone to keep Putin's air force out, Ukraine has had to fight Russian fighter aircraft using ground-based weapon systems. And the results for Ukraine have been far from bad. Image after image since the beginning of the war has seen Ukraine claim big hits on Russian Air Force combat aircraft. Like this Russian Sukhoi Su-35 air superiority fighter that was shot down using NATO weaponry. The pilot now in Ukrainian captivity. one of several pilots that Ukraine claims to have captured alive. Russia had made a dramatic early declaration after the invasion began that it had paralyzed Ukraine's air defense network. But these images testify to the reality that Ukraine has been able to impose a significant cost on Russia's air power strength. According to the latest Ukrainian claims, over 170 Russian fighter jets have been shot down in less than 2 months of this war. That's more than 8 squadrons worth of frontline combat aircraft, a huge cost by any measure. Using Stinger and Starstreak air defense missile systems supplied by Nato, in addition to legacy anti-aircraft weapons, Ukraine has been able to effectively target and destroy tens of aircraft in the last few weeks of this war. Far from the unchallenged airspace that the Russian Air Force may have been expecting, Ukraine has been able to put up more than the semblance of a fight. The aircraft types shot down by Ukraine include the most visible Russian aircraft in the Ukraine crisis, Sukhoi Su-25s. Tough old Soviet-era birds that have taken on most attack duties in the combat zone of Ukraine. Ukrainian missiles have also brought down several Russian Sukhoi Su-34 supersonic medium-range fighter bombers. But even with all that damage, Russia has a huge air force with many more assets to throw into the combat mix. As borne out by the aerial strikes just this week in the city of Mariupol. And continuing air power missions being launched by frontline Sukhoi Su-35 squadrons, videos of which are regularly published by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Ukrainian pilots haven't been flying many missions. And the country's air force has been trying desperately to get combat jets from NATO, a quest so far unsuccessful. But even without an air battle in the traditional sense, Ukraine has given Putin's pilots a great deal to chew on, both in the air and on the ground. When the invasion began, Russia had perhaps hoped that with a concerted armored assault, supported by battle-hardened attack helicopters from the air, the invasion would be complete very shortly. What they hadn't accounted for was a highly resilient air defense soldiery that was spread across Ukraine, lying in wait to shoot down those helicopters. And that's the reason why Russia has apparently lost so many attack helicopters in the war so far. Take a look. A stunning 32-second clip capturing a Russian attack helicopter being shot down by a Ukrainian shoulder-fired missile, exploding just weeks ago from the battlefield north of Kyiv. This in the early weeks of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The video becoming representative of what Ukraine claims has been hell for Russian combat helicopters. According to the latest claims by Ukraine, over 150 Russian military choppers have been shot down in the war so far. That's roughly 7 squadrons worth of battlefield helicopters, a staggeringly high price to pay. But in image after image that has emanated from the Ukrainian combat zone, the damage is visibly clear. The damage is especially telling since it was Russian heli-borne forces that first infiltrated the areas around Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. But they have since been challenged heavily. The Russian helicopter types that have been shot down in significant numbers as claimed by Ukraine include the Kamov Ka-52 Alligator. The images of one such helicopter made to force land went viral in the early days of the invasion. Several more are said to be flying sorties in the northern areas, with several shot down since. Ukraine also claims to have brought down several Mi-35 heavy attack helicopters. like the one hit by a Stinger missile in this early viral video. The most intense battlefields around Kyiv and in the eastern part of the country have also seen several Russian utility helicopters brought down, a blow to Russia's combat logistics and troop movements by air. The iconic Russian Mi-28 Havoc has also been facing heavy challenges from Ukrainian ground defenses, with several claimed to have been shot down in the first weeks of the war. Flying low and slow, helicopters are the quintessential battlefield asset, capable of creeping up on adversaries and suddenly raining hell on them. But Ukraine, with massive help from NATO equipment, weapons and sensors and ground-level training, has been able to throw up a huge challenge to marauding Russian helicopter crews. Russia has hundreds more such helicopters and has shown the stomach to absorb the huge claimed damage to its helicopter strength. But Ukraine remains determined to chip away at every rotor blade that comes chopping into the battlefield. And let's never forget that despite all of these hits, Putin and Russia's military will not be backing off anytime soon. The war is far from over. We will continue to track every step that it takes. Thanks for watching this special broadcast of Battle Cry. The news continues on the other side.